MASH turned a mobile army hospital into one of television's most unlikely sanctuaries. Premiering on September 17, 1972, it dropped viewers into a Korean War field unit and asked Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce, Loretta Swit's Margaret, Hot Lips, Houlihan, Wayne Rogers's Trapper John, McLean Stevenson's Henry Blake, Jamie Farr's Klinger, and Gary Berghoff's Radar O'Reilly to survive blood, boredom, and bureaucracy with nothing but black humor, bad food, and the occasional martini. Across 11 seasons and a record-shattering finale, the series evolved from broad gag-driven war comedy into a groundbreaking blend of satire and drama that treated operating rooms like confessional booths and helicopter blades like a ticking clock. Yet behind the laugh track, the cross-dressing schemes, and the poker games was a saga of sudden exits, secret rules, real fires, and a goodbye so massive it briefly bent the country around it. These are 15 shocking facts about MASH. How it was made, how it pushed against its own network, and how it quietly changed the way television talked about war, trauma, and saying farewell. And stick around for number 15 to see how a little comedy about Korea ended up teaching an entire nation what the cost of war really looks like. Number 1. The haunting theme was written by a teenager. The melody that opens every episode of MASH feels like it has been around forever. Slow, mournful, and instantly recognizable, it sounds like the work of an experienced composer who has seen a lifetime of loss. Instead, it came from a 14-year-old. Suicide is Painless, the theme first written for the MASH feature film, began as a direct assignment from director Robert Altman. He needed lyrics for the film's now infamous Last Supper sequence, a faux suicide scene built around the character Walter, Painless Pole Waldowski. The song had to fit a very specific tone, bleak, simple, almost offhand. In Altman's own words, it needed to sound like the stupidest song ever written. Rather than hire a veteran songwriter, he turned to his own son, Mike Altman. The teenager delivered exactly what his father asked for, lyrics that were dark, ironic, and unsettlingly catchy. The TV series later kept the melody in instrumental form and dropped the words entirely, but the mood remained untouched. Every week, that same tune floated over shots of helicopters and stretchers, setting a tone that told audiences this would not be a standard sitcom. The real twist, however, lives in the paychecks. Mike Altman's song became a recurring theme across 11 seasons, and with it came substantial royalties. He reportedly made more than $1 million from that single composition, while his father earned around $70,000 directing the entire film. By the time most teenagers were thinking about a first car, Mike Altman had already written the musical signature for one of television's most defining shows. MASH, a series about adults cracking under the unbearable pressure of war, opened every single episode with a melody born entirely from a teenager's pen. Somehow, that contrast only made it more powerful. Number 2. The laugh track became a battlefield. When MASH first went to air, CBS had a straightforward expectation. If it was a comedy, it needed canned laughter. That was the unspoken rule of television at the time. Jokes were followed by laughs, even if those laughs were entirely manufactured. For a series set inside a combat hospital, that expectation created an immediate and uncomfortable problem. Series creator Larry Gelbart pushed back hard. To him, there was something deeply wrong about overlaying chuckles on top of wounded soldiers and surgical gore. The compromise he eventually won seemed small on paper but proved enormous in practice. No laugh track during surgery. That single decision carved out a deliberate pocket of silence right in the middle of every episode. Inside the operating room, audiences heard only instruments, quiet orders, and the occasional strange joke that landed with no audible response whatsoever. It gave those scenes a weight that bright lights and clashing metal alone could never carry. Over time, that initial crack in the network's armor widened as the series grew more confident in its identity. The bursts of canned laughter that existed outside the oar grew sparer and more selective with each passing season. Jokes still landed, but increasingly the show trusted its viewers to decide for themselves when and how to react. By the later seasons, what had begun as a non-negotiable network demand had quietly faded into the background, replaced by something much closer to what the creators had always wanted: the freedom to let silence, tension, and genuine discomfort breathe without forced applause interrupting the moment. Number 3. MASH turned a sitcom into group therapy. The earliest episodes leaned hard into chaos, martinis in the swamp, cross-dressing schemes for Section 8 discharges, and rapid-fire gags about meatball surgery. But as the show settled into itself, something fundamental shifted. The jokes didn't disappear. They simply stopped being the entire point. Midway through the run, episodes began to feel less like standard half-hour comedies and more like guided tours through the psychological fallout of prolonged war. Hawkeye's breakdown. BJ's quiet, private unraveling. Stories where 20 minutes could pass with barely a laugh, replaced instead by tight close-ups, long silences, and conversations that trailed off rather than landing cleanly on punchlines. Those shifts were not random creative decisions. Gelbart pulled directly from interviews and lived experiences shared by real veterans, people who had inhabited versions of what the characters were only acting out. Rather than focusing on battlefield heroics, MASH turned its lens on what happened behind the lines. The exhaustion, the emotional numbness, the way a single difficult case could haunt a surgeon long after the patient had left the table. In an era when primetime television almost always reset itself every week, MASH began allowing emotional damage to linger and accumulate. A joke from one episode could echo painfully a full season later. A smile shared over post-op coffee might quietly hide a memory of the night before. What began as a broad comedy slowly and deliberately morphed into something far more rare. A half-hour series willing to admit that some wounds simply do not close just because the credits roll. Number 4. Hawkeye had one unbreakable rule. He never kills. On most war shows, the central character eventually picks up a weapon. It feels almost inevitable. Firefights, self-defense, a desperate act of survival. Television has always been built on those moments. On MASH, the writers steer Hawkeye Pierce in a firmly different direction, and that was no accident. Alda set a clear and immovable boundary for his character from early in the series. Hawkeye would not take a life under any circumstances. The man who spent every working hour stitching people back together was not going to be the one responsible for putting bullets into them. Hawkeye openly refused to carry a gun, telling Frank Burns directly in one episode that he had a very clear personal understanding with the Pentagon. No guns, no exceptions. That rule carried real narrative weight. It forced storylines that might otherwise have veered toward gunplay or direct combat to find a completely different path through the danger. When trouble closed in around him, Hawkeye responded with medicine, with words, or with flat refusal. On the rare occasion a script pushed his hand, as in the Season 5 episode Hawkeye Get Your Gun, the character fired into the open air rather than at another human being. Even when writers explored scenes that might blur that line, Alda pushed back. If Hawkeye crossed that threshold even once, the moral center of the entire show shifted. MASH was never meant to celebrate battlefield glory. It existed to examine the cost of war on those who spent every day trying to repair its damage. So Hawkeye remained a surgeon and not a soldier, in the most literal sense the show could manage. Number 5. Alda became the show's architect. Most lead actors learn their lines, hit their marks, and go home. Alda did all of that, and then kept going in every direction imaginable. As MASH matured, his role behind the scenes expanded in ways that fundamentally shaped the series. By the time it ended, he had contributed to writing 19 episodes and directed 32, including the 2.5-hour finale. He also appeared in every single episode across all 11 seasons, a sustained presence that survived multiple cast changes, dramatic tone shifts, and bold narrative experiments. As original writers and producers gradually departed the series, Alda's creative influence expanded to fill those gaps. He argued consistently for emotional complexity, moral ambiguity, and the removal of anything that leaned toward glorifying war rather than honestly questioning it. He was central to the push against the laugh track. He championed the quieter, heavier stories that might never have existed in the show's earlier years. The industry recognized what he was building. Across his run on MASH, Alda earned 21 Emmy nominations and won 5, becoming the first person in television history to win Emmy Awards for acting, writing, and directing on the same series. Those trophies reflected something real. MASH had become, in many ways, a direct extension of his creative instincts and his convictions about what the show owed its audience. The 4077th was never officially under Hawkeye's command, but behind the camera, his influence shaped everything from the precise timing of a joke to the full weight of a character's collapse. Number 6. Trapper John vanished after an unsigned exit. For 3 full seasons, Wayne Rogers' Trapper John stood as Hawkeye's equal partner in mischief, a natural co-conspirator, and the other half of the series' early buddy comedy energy. Then, between seasons, he was simply gone. There was no emotional farewell on the helicopter pad, no lingering goodbye scene echoing Henry Blake's later departure. Trapper didn't return, and viewers were told through a single offhand line that he had been discharged and sent home. The backstory was considerably sharper. Rogers had signed on expecting a genuinely balanced two-hander between Hawkeye and Trapper. As the show evolved, Hawkeye became the undeniable narrative center, and Rogers watched his role quietly diminish. During the summer break between seasons 3 and 4, he walked away from the production entirely. When 20th Century Fox threatened legal action for breach of contract, they discovered an obstacle nobody had anticipated. Rogers had never actually signed his contract. He had objected to a morality clause in the original document and, without any announcement, simply left it unsigned. Without that signature, the studio had no legal leverage and the threatened lawsuit collapsed. Trapper John's final appearance on MASH turned out to be whatever audiences had already seen. No dedicated farewell episode, no closing speech, just a brief line confirming he was already on a plane headed home. For a show that usually honored its goodbyes with great care, his was a hard and unceremonious cut. Number 7. Henry Blake's death shocked both the cast and the network. Few moments in television history land with quite the force of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's final flight. He boards a helicopter, smiling broadly and visibly relieved to finally be going home. Then, later in the hour, radar walks in and delivers the news in a shaking voice. Henry's plane has been shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. That gut punch was not only designed for the audience. The cast experienced it in real time as well. McLean Stevenson had decided to leave the series at the end of season 3, and producers Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds chose to mark his exit in a way that captured the true randomness and cruelty of war. They guarded that decision carefully. Only Alda was informed in advance. The rest of the cast did not see the final page of the script until the actual day of filming. Gelbart deliberately scheduled the scene as the very last thing captured for the entire season. After finishing the earlier, lighter discharge scene, the crew began breaking down for summer. That was when Gelbart pulled everyone aside, opened a sealed envelope, and handed each cast member a copy of the single-page final scene. Their reactions were completely unfiltered. Gary Berghoff nearly refused to read it. Loretta Swit was visibly stunned. Jamie Farr later recalled the cast being quietly devastated. McLean Stevenson, who had stayed on set to witness his own farewell, was left speechless. The entire scene was filmed in a single take, saturated with genuine shock from people who had learned the truth only minutes before the cameras rolled. CBS executives were just as alarmed. Killing a beloved character on a comedy had never been done before, and the network made its displeasure known. The writers held firm. In war, not everyone gets home safely, not even on a show that makes you laugh. Number 8. A real fire became the finale's most honest moment. When the production of Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen began, everyone expected emotion. Nobody expected actual flames. In October 1982, a brush fire swept through the Fox Ranch at Malibu Creek, where the outdoor sets had stood for years. Tents, the mess hall, Radar's office, the recognizable bones of the 4077th all went up in smoke. Cast and crew were already deep into the process of saying goodbye to their fictional home when nature violently and permanently erased the physical location itself. Rather than rebuild or shoot around the damage, the producers did what MASH had always done best. They folded reality directly into the story. The burning camp in the finale is not a carefully staged illusion. It is genuine footage of the actual set being consumed by the fire. A myth grew afterward that cast and crew had buried pieces of the set in a private ceremony, laying the 4077th to rest with intention and grace. The truth was messier and more chaotic. Nature had simply made the decision for everyone. The location now sits inside Malibu Creek State Park, left to weather and the occasional hiker. The fictional camp that hosted a decade of stories ended not with a planned demolition but with an unscripted blaze that was captured on film and folded permanently into television history. Number 9. Radar's teddy bear took decades to find its way home. Radar O'Reilly's teddy bear meant more than any prop on the show had a right to mean. It represented innocence, quiet vulnerability, and the stubborn part of Radar that refused to grow numb no matter what the war placed in front of him. After the series ended, the bear disappeared entirely. Gary Berghoff described what followed as a non-ending search lasting nearly 3 decades. It resurfaced in July 2005 at a Hollywood auction, selling for just under $11,800. The winning bidder was a medical student. Berghoff later acquired the bear from that buyer, bringing it briefly back to the actor who had given it its meaning, before auctioning it again in 2014 for $14,375. He donated the proceeds to organizations supporting wounded veterans, attaching a notarized letter authenticating the bear and explaining its long journey. A stuffed animal from a fictional Korean War cot had outlived the series, disappeared for decades, and returned to help real veterans in the world the show had always been speaking to. Number 10 through 15 carry the same quiet weight that defined everything before them. The show outlived the Korean War it depicted by nearly 8 years, which allowed it to do something no 3-year conflict ever could, slowly and methodically unpack what prolonged exposure to death and survival does to ordinary human beings over time. Rather than presenting heroes with clean arcs, MASH gave viewers surgeons and nurses who accumulated damage season by season, carrying it visibly into the next year and the one after that. By redefining itself from war comedy into something harder to categorize, the series created space for stories that prime time had never seriously attempted. Hawkeye's unbroken presence across all 11 seasons made his eventual breakdown in the finale not just dramatically effective, but emotionally earned in a way that only years of accumulated trust between character and audience could produce. The finale itself, airing on February 28, 1983, drew 105.97 million viewers with a total estimated audience of 121.6 million, surpassing every Super Bowl that had aired before it and remaining the most-watched scripted television episode in American history to this day. The evening it aired, New York City water tunnels recorded a surge of 300 million gallons per day just 3 minutes after the credits rolled, the result of roughly 1 million people finally allowing themselves a bathroom break after holding on through the entire broadcast. Advertisers paid $450,000 for a single 30-second spot, more than the network charged for that same year's Super Bowl. And underneath all of it, running through every record and every number, was the thing MASH had been building toward since its earliest episodes, a sustained, honest, and genuinely compassionate portrait of what invisible wounds look like, long before the vocabulary existed to name them properly. It argued without apology that surviving a war and coming home alive are not the same thing, and it made that argument week after week, season after season, until an entire nation had quietly absorbed the lesson.